Welcome to the City of Grand Rapids Planning Commission meeting for April 24th, 2025. We are going to get started with our public hearings, but before we do, I just want to give you an overview of how this will go today. First off, staff will present their staff report, then we'll have the applicants come up and add anything that they would like. We'll open up a public hearing so anyone from the public can come and address the commission for up to 3 minutes. And then we'll have our deliberations and make decisions. I want to let everyone know that staff does prepare draft resolutions for us, providing us guidance both for and against. So if it looks like we're reading, we are, but we modify those on a case-by-case basis for each case we see. We're also being streamed live on Facebook right now. And I think that is everything I need to say. Any conflicts of interest today? Seeing none, we can move to our first case, zoning ordinance text amendments.
All right. Thank you, commissioners. The request should look somewhat familiar to you in that earlier this year you held a public hearing on proposed text amendments that were ultimately unanimously recommended by the Planning Commission to the City Commission for adoption. The ordinance amendments specifically were, there was a package of them, and the two that we're going to be talking about today are in regards to the egress basement window wells and front yard parking for commercial districts. And so the City Commission did hear those cases in consideration. The other amendments were supported by the City Commission and subsequently adopted. However, there were two items with respect to the topics I've just mentioned that the City Commission has requested further deliberation by the Planning Commission. So in both cases, egress window wells and front yard parking and the reconstruction of parking when it's existing in a front yard are not items that the ordinance allows for. Let me rephrase that, I'm sorry. In regards to basement egress window wells, we do require at least 3 feet, and we do not allow for front yard parking, existing front yard parking to be reconstructed. So over the past several years, the Board of Zoning Appeals has had a number of variance requests, and they had a pattern of approving either window wells less than 3 feet and or the reconstruction of parking, surface parking in a front yard. So when we start to see patterns of decision making like that, it is completely appropriate for either the board or city staff to bring forward to the Planning Commission, identify that that pattern of decision making is happening, and then also look to adjust the policy to allow for the ordinance to allow for those situations or those things to happen versus requiring a variance. So City staff put together those amendments for you previously. Our recommendation was is to allow for an administrative departure process, which is kind of similar to what I would consider like a staff level variance. So it allows for a deviation from the strict application of the zoning ordinance and allows for a little bit of flexibility based on certain conditions, either of the property or of the adjacent property. And there's standards that guide that decision making for city staff. So our recommendation with regards to basement window wells was to allow for window wells to exist when at least 1 foot existed with an admin departure. And with respect to front yard parking, it allows for some reconstruction of front yard parking with an administrative departure. So again, City Commission has asked whether you could deliberate a little bit further and determine whether a by right or permitted scenario could exist for either of those amendments. City staff, thank you, Elizabeth and Rowan. Laura did a really good job, I think, laying out, maybe further articulating why an administrative departure is what we would consider the appropriate process versus a by right. And there are different reasons for that. So I'll take the basement window well first. Basement window wells, when located within 1 foot, really puts into question about what is the safe egress path from that window well. And then also where is the ladder that the window well has? Is it a side ladder to get out? Because many window wells are actually in front of the window itself, which of course, if you only have 1 foot, you can't safely or easily egress from within that dimension. So looking at what existing conditions are along that side lot line, looking at the constructability and making sure that any window well that is installed within a foot has the appropriate construction methods so not to undermine the adjacent stability of the property. We also, administrative departures, although it is another review application and there is a fee, they do happen generally concurrent with the permit itself, in this case, the building permit. So there's not always or necessarily additional time that it takes city staff to review just because it has another or a separate review application. What it does is allow for us to have a more holistic consideration of what's happening on the property, probably requesting a little bit more information from the applicant that may not be standard, and then allow for us to make a informed decision, again, utilizing the standards that we have before us. And so it continues to be our and then further, with site plan review considerations, those are quite a bit different than special land use for a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons is when an application meets all of the setback requirements or all of the site plan standards, we are legally obligated or required to approve that. We don't have the same level of consideration around our review standards that the Planning Commission does, for example, when you're considering a special land use. So those are objective requirements in site plan review. Do you meet the setback or not? And so because we don't have a tremendous amount of experience processing and reviewing window wells within a foot of a lot line, we felt like this was a natural transition point for us to go from a variance process, which is a pretty thorough review process, pretty rigorous in terms of the review standards and the application necessary that you have to pull together, as well as the review fee. So we felt like this was a natural transition before making it or considering it to be a permitted situation in the city. It could very well be that in a year from now, we look at this and say, we got a good handle, we understand the impacts, we'd be comfortable moving it forward as part of a typical building permit process. That's not our recommendation today as staff. So that is one area that we are asking you to further deliberate, and perhaps you might arrive at a different conclusion. Note that we're asking for discussion today. We have not prepared draft language for you because we wanted to have that informed policy discussion before we put resources into drafting language that may or may not be relevant. Of course, you do have the option to make a decision and reaffirm the recommendation you have previously made. In regards to front yard parking, I won't go back over the details of it, but it is a fairly complicated process, a code language, should we move it to a permitted situation. The reason for that is the basic premise is that in almost all zone districts in the city, we do not allow parking in a front yard for uses other than single family, two family, meaning you don't construct a parking lot between the street and the building. There are many that exist in the city, and the administrative departure process is intended to allow for some flexibility for us to consider allowing a greater level of reconstruction of these surface parking lots, because in many cases they either don't have, they're in poor condition, the infrastructure is failing, and in many cases they don't have the stormwater infrastructure that perhaps we would also benefit from as a city, or they don't have the necessary landscape requirements. So moving that with the baseline policy of parking lots are not in a front yard, it would be a very difficult code logic for us to have that as the foundational issue and then try to articulate language of, but it's okay or it's permitted when the following circumstances exist. It'll be a lot of kind of almost like a choose your own adventure language, if this then that, if that then this. The challenges with that is it is not intuitive language for civil engineers in many cases to understand what is and what isn't allowed. It is the more we have the if this then that scenario in the ordinance, it becomes much more difficult for enforcement and interpretation of that code language, and it becomes a lot more difficult for city staff to be consistent in our interpretation, meaning all 7 of us administering it the same way. And so I'd be very concerned about trying to craft language that allowed for reconstruction of small parking lots as a permitted or by right scenario for those reasons. Am I missing anything? Did I miss anything? Okay. So I think that, again, as planning director recommendation and planning staff, we believe that the administrative departures are an appropriate review process. They do, for the most part, happen concurrently. So there is not a significant cause and delay for that review timeline to take place. And many times, Rowan is here today. He's one of our permit reviewers for the planning department. A lot of times these discussions and the review processes are happening concurrently, but there is the ability for us to track those decisions and be very methodical about existing site conditions and looking at the purpose and intent of the zoning ordinance. Yes, there is a review fee. I believe it's 200, 225, 224, 252. I didn't read the line. Thank you. So there is a review fee that is associated with that. So I don't want to dismiss that there isn't additional work and application fee, but note that there is additional work by the city staff to work with an applicant through that process. So we are comfortable with the language as is, but I will turn it back over to the Planning Commission to further deliberate and ask staff questions. I'll acknowledge that our building official, or assistant building official, Bill Hordike is also here today if we have a question about, technical aspects of installing window wells and egress, because there are obviously a layer of building code review that takes place there. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristen. Does anyone have questions for Kristen or other city staff at this point? Okay, seeing none, I will open up the we're having a public hearing on this, right? I'll open up the public hearing on this. If you're here to speak on this issue, please make your way up to the mic and address commission. All right.
Jim Bradbury, 1263.
I'm sorry, will you turn I think just press the button. Yes, yes.
Jim Bradbury, 1263 North Doral, over by Huff Park. We're in the process of putting in an egress window, so this would help in our case because most of the homes are so close to the property lines. In my case, I need 6 feet. I'm 5 feet 8 inches. It's on a hillside. I could excavate out the hill to open up the window, but I prefer to have a well in there. So this text amendment would allow that down to I think 4 feet instead of 6 feet needed, which would open it up a little. I think there's nothing blocking anybody from getting in the backyard or anything like that. It's just this would help without asking for a variance, in my case, saving time and money. So, thank you.
Anyone else on this case?
I'll note that we did receive 2 pieces of correspondence, one from a local builder, Nathan Biller, who has expressed generally support for allowing a by right or permitted situation versus the admin departure specific to the window well. We also you also received a communication from the Board of Zoning Appeals, who again expresses their support for the process as you've previously recommended it.
Thank you for that. Okay, I will close the public hearing on this. Commissioners?
So I appreciate all the effort that city staff has put in on I'm going to start with the window wells, I guess. Into this and their recommendations and their understanding their concerns. I'm a little surprised that we're seeing this again because we already went through it, and I'm a little confused about that whole thing because this seems not worth doing it again over, but since we're here, I have a couple of, and maybe I should have asked them as questions, but like undermining neighbors' foundations, you're not allowed to do that when you have a construction project, so I'm curious if there's a little bit of redundancy in requiring an administrative departure as part of that, because, well, I don't know. I mean, do you have to have plans reviewed in order to do a window well?
You do. I think, so one, it probably is a little bit redundant, but we do that intentionally because try to keep things in one complete format where possible. So most people who are looking at window wells tend to go to the zoning ordinance first. So it kind of, they do reinforce each other, the building and zoning code. So it is a little bit redundant, but I think one of the main concerns that we had is going from 3 feet to 1 foot. We don't get plans generally right now that contemplate how those construction methods might impact or undermine, I should say, the adjacent property. And so this is putting a flag to both the property owner and city staff saying, hey, this is, I'm paraphrasing, of course, this is really close. We need to make sure that we have the necessary precautions in place.
So do we know what practically those precautions are? Like who's looking at it, who's reviewing it, who's deciding that the soils are suitable and we're not undermining someone else's foundation, or whether or not we know if the neighboring property is slab on grade and we might need to be worried about the depth of their foundation compared to a window well versus whether or not it has a basement? Like who's doing all of that
Yep,
as
so
part of this
that would be the building department.
process?
So I would have Bill Hordyke, our assistant building official, touch on maybe some practices or things that we would be looking for to determine whether adequate stabilization methods are in place.
Sure. Bill Hordyke, Assistant Building Official for the Building Inspections Department. What's required for submitting for the application, I see your sense of like, hey, we need to be looking at things. I don't actually have a requirement in there to dictate or to show me what the neighbor's property is in there on the building site. I'm looking at the site as it is in there. And so in a situation that could be a by right that you could put it right up to the property line, I might not know what's on that other side there. There's a requirement within the building code that says that if the applicant or if the contractor is excavating adjacent to neighboring property lines, that you need to notify the neighbor of that situation when they're going to be excavating there, and you need to protect the neighbor's property from your excavation activities in there. But I might not, within the scope of that building department or with that building permit, it might be a little vague in there. And so by having that zoning ordinance saying, hey, we needed to ask a couple extra questions on this, rather than just the checklist of questions that we have from there, opens that lens up to look a little further out there of like, hold up, we got a situation that we got to address with this. There's some other items in there about access to mechanical equipment in there. I think the requirement for egress in there. Yes, I have those very prescriptively in the building code in there about those things, but I think the intent of the administrative departure is to open that lens up a little bit bigger to stuff that might not be specifically written in the ordinance in there, but still of concern on that application in there. I don't know if that answers your question, or...
It goes back to having that explicit authority for us to be asking those questions because it is only 1 foot, and we wouldn't always ask that question when we have more dimension between.
Okay. I mean, part of my questioning is because we were asked to do this, so I'm trying to think of reasons why, or things maybe we should consider. So the redundancy still gets me a little bit. I mean, I understand the conditions. I'm curious if there's a way to require a site plan with the building submittal if you're going to be less than 3 feet from the property line. So, I mean, all of that to say, I could get myself behind this either way. I can stand behind our original decision and let staff review it. I am a supporter of, I mean, I know Our development center is a very busy place, so the more we can appropriately take things off from people's plates is probably a good thing. So I'm trying to be aware of that too, but I do think that, when there's a requirement that's a law or a rule that says you can't ruin your neighbor's house by digging a hole, I question whether or not we need to make another step, because then we're basically assuming that people aren't going to do what they're required to do, or saying that we need to oversee them because they can't be completely trusted to do what they're supposed to do. So, and I don't know that, I guess I question that attitude a little bit, in that rule already exists. And certainly, hopefully, nobody's undermining their neighbor's foundation because they had a project under any circumstances, but
It does happen.
I'm sure it does.
Again, I don't like redundancy for the sake of redundancy, but it helps with the administration in certain circumstances when we do have redundancy, because things are very explicitly clear what is needed for that review process versus debating with an owner or operator of trying to install a window well as to whether it is or isn't needed and how much information should be provided. So sometimes that ease of administration is also a factor in the language that we use.
I want to thank our Board of Zoning Appeals for providing us their input on this too, since they have been the ones to see these cases, as the city has kind of gained those examples and got us to where we are now. And I was compelled by the phrase in here that they believe that the standard 3-foot setback remains the preferred requirement, and if we did recommend this go by right, then 1 foot would essentially become what our ordinance says is preferred and available. And so I think this is a great step in the right direction, and it gives staff an opportunity to build the city's body of experience with window wells at 1 foot, so that maybe eventually we do get to that by right or permitted status. But I think what we landed on, based on staff recommendation, is appropriate now. Okay, do we want to move on to the front yard parking? Okay,
Sure.
yeah.
I can talk about that one too, if you want, or you can tell me not to. That's okay too. The front yard parking, I think, is a little more nuanced for me. I think there's probably value in having it written the way that it is, and that front yard parking is not allowed, but leaving a path for dealing with existing situations, and working with city staff to make sure that it's dealt with appropriately. I agree that it gets complicated. They're all unique scenarios. They're all, I don't think that to me, there's not a great way to do that without an administrative departure. And if you're doing a window well, a couple $100 might matter in the few hours you have to put into dealing or working with city staff, maybe. But if you're resurfacing a parking lot as part of your project, a couple $100 and making sure you talk to city staff about it, I'm sorry, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and I think specifically our desire to continually get to compliance with the zoning ordinance over those gradual steps, and working with staff to help increase buffers and screening as appropriate in that can be done on those sites, even while allowing the resurfacing of those front yard lots. I think that is another important reason to keep this as an administrative departure and not permitted.
Yeah, thank you. My experience, and I think most of my staff who have worked in other jurisdictions and maybe the design professionals as well would agree, having the ability to even seek administrative departures versus a variance process is an incredibly favorable tool for the development community. Again, broad reference there, is an incredibly favorable tool to the development community because it gives us the ability to look at a case-by-case situation and determine what is appropriate. It gives us that flexibility that I don't know of any other community in the state of Michigan has that. That's probably a broad sweeping statement, but none that I've worked for. And so they are a very favorable tool that the development community is supportive of. It is very rare that we receive feedback that these are burdensome review processes or overly burdensome in terms of the cost. Of course, there's exceptions to that perhaps, but again, in general, it is a favorable tool for us. So we are very comfortable with it. Especially with the administrative piece of the front yard parking with that base of it's not permitted, giving us that flexibility versus the variance. I mean, those two variance processes compared to administrative departures are simply not comparable. It is far simpler to work with city staff than to articulate a quasi-judicial application and articulate that to a Board of Zoning Appeals. So I appreciate it. Oh, sorry, Commissioner.
No.
Oh. So I appreciate your thoughtfulness and what think I'm hearing is support moving forward, but I'll let you complete your thought there.
I think in both of these cases where you can take something that's not permitting a variance but is an administrative procedure overall, and I don't even know how many cases you're even foreseeing in this a year, but it can't be over, I don't know, I won't try to guess, but it seems to me that what you're doing is you're not allowing people to do over what they can do, but to do what they can do, but within a very tight framework that can be administratively handled. And the opportunities to do that, I think, are both a benefit to the public and to the staff and to the Planning Commission.
Okay, I'm hearing general consensus here. Would someone be willing to make a motion? Okay.
I can make this one. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission recommends that the City Commission approve the proposed text amendments to the zoning ordinance for the following reasons. The proposed amendments are consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance because the amendments support a number of recommendations and objectives of the 2024 Community Master Plan, including 1.8, provide adequate resources to meet community needs, 1.B.4, assess and reduce barriers to innovative housing solutions, and 3.C, balance economic growth with priorities for the environment. The proposed amendments will enhance the functionality or character of the future development in the city because the proposed administrative departures will facilitate property owners' ability to make investments in their properties. The proposed amendments will enhance the natural features and environmental integrity of the city because allowing gradual compliance of elimination of front yard parking over time will bring sites closer to compliance with current green space and parking lot landscaping and screening requirements. The proposed amendments will protect the health, safety, and general welfare of the public because the administrative departures will reduce cost and time barriers for property owners. And the specific conditions for an administrative departure for the location of window wells were designed to ensure consistency between the zoning ordinance and building code and safeguard properties given the potential complexities and unforeseen circumstances associated with work in close proximity to a lot line. The proposed amendments are needed to correct an error or omission in the original text because the administrative departures are intended to facilitate administrative review of requests that have been consistently approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals. The proposed amendments will address a community need in physical or economic conditions or development practices because the egress window well amendment will allow for existing housing stock to be more fully utilized. The amendments recognize the existence of property constraints, and the parking amendment will facilitate property maintenance. The proposed amendments would not result in the creation of significant nonconformities in the city because replacement of front yard parking lots would be limited to situations where no other practical alternative exists, the parking lot is not expanded, and landscaping is brought closer to current requirements.
Second.
All right, a motion by Bershey, second by Shannon. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, same sign? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we will move on to our next case, 928 Wealthy Street Southeast, and Laura will walk us through this.
So the next case before you today is 928 Wealthy Street Southeast, and this request includes two special land use considerations. The first is to formalize permanent operations of an outdoor seating area with alcohol service. The second request is approval to hold up to 10 outdoor events per year. The subject property is located on the south side of Wealthy Street between Eureka and Diamond Avenues in the TN-TBA Zone District and in the Wealthy Street Historic District as well. The property is surrounded by office and residential uses. And there are 3 buildings on the site, 2 of which front Wealthy Street. Speciation, or the applicant, occupies the original building on the site that is it was formerly a brick garage located at the rear of the lot. In February of 2020, the applicant brought a request to the Planning Commission that was approved to establish a microbrewery and tap room in the subject property, the building on this site. Shortly after, of course, we all remember the COVID-19 shutdowns. So right as they were beginning to open, everything shut down. So the applicant, as many businesses did, received approval from the MLCC to allow outdoor service at that time. And, so the outdoor patio that was established then has been in operation since that time. And I will also add, without incident, there have been no issues with the outdoor seating. It still needs zoning approval, especially considering the residential uses that are in close proximity to the patio area. And because outdoor seating wasn't originally requested and included in the approval that the Planning Commission granted back in 2020, it is here before you again today. As you can see on the site plan, the parking lot is striped with 16 parking spaces. 5 of the parking spaces at the rear of the lot are in a tandem parking situation that really don't allow free ingress and egress access to those spaces. The outdoor patio occupies these 5 spaces. It is delineated, as you can see in the photos, by planters and barrels. And our historic preservation specialist has reviewed what is there today, and it meets all of the historic preservation requirements as well. The outdoor seating hours will be in line with those of the tap room, open until 11 p.m. at the latest on Fridays and Saturdays. The original approval included a waiver of 1 parking space. Because the outdoor patio occupies 5 parking spaces and the additional 26 seats on the patio require 7 more parking spaces. Parking is now deficient by 12 spaces. This is a very walkable area. Lots of people walk, ride their bikes. There's on-street parking and transit available in close proximity. And the deficiency can be met through on-street and district parking. The applicant, so the next part of this request are the outdoor events. The applicant is requesting up to 10 outdoor events per year. Events may include alcohol service, live entertainment, food trucks, and pop-up tents for vendors. I'll let the applicant give more explanation and details. In your packet, there are, the applicant has provided specifics on 3 different types of events that provide an idea of the range of events that would be occurring on the site. The site plan before you shows a general layout. The entire parking lot would be used for events with location for live entertainment on the patio. There's space for a food truck, and the numbered boxes would be the vendors, the pop-up tents. The proposed, so this request really, Planning Commission consideration, it's important to consider the proposed frequency of the events and the nature of events and potential impacts to surrounding uses and residential properties. Regarding the site layout, both driveways are proposed to close, and anywhere between 150 and 400 people are anticipated to attend the events. I think the larger number, and the applicant can explain more, that might be an event that occurs for a longer amount of time, maybe not all at the same time. So this is more people than generally visit the establishment on a daily basis. So the applicant has developed a relationship with Wellspring Church at 811 Wealthy Street. It is just off of this map to the west. The church has a very large parking lot that is not used most of the time, and has agreed to allow use of that surface parking lot for people visiting for these event times. Each event would require application for a temporary use permit, and these permits are administratively reviewed and approved. And there are, Article 9 of the zoning ordinance has a list of use standards that staff uses when reviewing and issuing temporary use permit requests for events. Those standards are detailed in your staff report as well. And any parameters that the Planning Commission may consider today that are included as a condition of approval on today's decision would also be part of the staff review for the temporary use permits for each event. I will also mention that the applicant has provided some indication that depending on the nature of sound amplification and live performances, they are proposing different areas on the property, whether outside or inside the building with a door open, the overhead door open or closed, depending on the time of day and the nature of the live performance and amplification. There are also several letters of support that have been submitted and are included in your packets. So in sum, we ask the Planning Commission to consider the outdoor seating with alcohol service and up to 10 outdoor events with live entertainment per year. Does anybody have questions?
Thank you, Laura. Any questions? Okay, we'll invite the applicant up.
Hi, I'm Mitch Ermatinger from Speciation Artisan Ales.
Wonderful. Do you have additional details you want to add, or do you want us to just ask you questions?
Not in particular. I do want to say that Wellspring Church, they didn't want to write a formal letter for us, but they agreed to a verbal agreement basically to use the parking lot as overflow. The other thing is that we have done events in the past, and we tried to go through the normal application process to have the event. The bigger one that I'm thinking of in particular is a Halloween event last year. But that didn't quite go through because there was some confusion in the original, basically ruling about whether we were even allowed to do outside events or not. So we went through that process, but that's kind of why I'm here today, actually, is to get clarification on what we can do and to get approval for kind of the events of the scope that we're looking to do.
Okay. Yes, in your application, you ask for up to 10 events. Are most of those one-day events? Are they two-day? What kind of?
Most are one day. Honestly, I kind of guessed on the high end so that we had some wiggle room.
Sure.
Most of them are one day with the exception of our solstice party in the summertime. So that's typically a Friday and a Saturday. That is kind of depend on the size of the event. This year, I think the bigger outdoor portion of it is just Saturday, but we still want the ability to have more people there on Friday, so.
Okay. And then can you talk about the different kind of proposals for your stage or performance area based on the type of
Sure.
act and amplification that you're talking about?
Yeah, so on this map here, the site map for our solstice event, we have acoustic band that is amplified with solar-powered amps, so they're not crazy amps. So we put them kind of in the back corner of the patio facing the parking lot. The other situation would be to have our garage door open for certain live music. In the original ruling, it was determined that the door should be closed during live amplified music, and that has been mostly fine, but there are a handful of events throughout the year where it would make a really huge difference to have that kind of open flow vibe in the tap room and in the parking lot. Obviously, we're not going to be having really intense, loud metal bands or something in the door open. We have a good relationship with all of our neighbors, a lot of them residential actually, and we haven't had any issues. So it's kind of going to be more dependent on like, we have a jazz band playing or maybe an acoustic duo or something like that. Those would be the situations where we would request to have the garage door open.
Gotcha. And about like what time of evening, or I guess what time do you anticipate performances to be done or your door to be closed? What would
Yeah,
your
so
preference on
for the
that?
most part, we're thinking for the bands out on the patio, those would all be like afternoon, like Saturday afternoon situations. I don't see us doing that in the evenings, just because it is completely surrounded by residential, and I don't think that anybody would like that, honestly. So that's kind of the main thing that we're thinking for that. The one exception to that would be our Halloween party, which we did have our garage door open for from 7 to 9 because we had a live DJ. So that 9 p.m. was about the latest that we really felt comfortable having the garage door open with amplified sound.
Okay, thank you. Do other folks have questions? Yeah, go for it.
I know you touched on this just a little bit, but on average, for your event, how many people do you have, let's say, on stage? How many musicians, singers altogether?
I mean, for most of we do live music at least once a week, every single Friday, and there's typically one band, sometimes two.
How many people are we talking on average for one band? Or you got a drummer, you got a piano, you got a bass player? I mean, what?
Depends quite a bit. The most we've had, I think, is six people playing at once. We've never had live music outside, though, I should clarify. So all the things that we have planned for outside are like 1 or 2 people.
Got you.
And then the inside, the bands really vary, but yeah, like 1 to 6 people inside.
And you had mentioned, I'm only asking this because you had mentioned you're not having heavy metal bands or something like that.
We do, but the door's closed.
Got you. Okay. So you generally, or you guys generally picked the particular bands in our music, or is it just open to the public? People can apply and come and sing
Yeah,
what they want?
I do all the booking for the shows, yep.
Okay, so people know what to expect. People know how loud it's going to get if they want to come out and enjoy the show.
Yep.
Okay, I like that. And then for the times, just to clarify the times, you said that in the summer, you don't necessarily feel like comfortable going past what time?
I don't know exactly. 9 p.m. is kind of what I feel like the neighborhood is okay with, having amplified sound outside. And I don't know if there's more city kind of rules about this, but that's kind of what we've landed on, is like people feel comfortable with stuff going on the weekends up to 9 p.m. outside.
Okay.
We haven't even done anything like that, so.
Okay. And most of these events you're thinking are only on the weekends, or do you have something during the day?
Yeah.
Or is it on the weekday that you have?
Weekend events, yep.
Okay. And how many on average, did you say, have you had in the past year?
Two, maybe
Okay.
3, just off the top of my head. I foresee maybe 5 or 6 this year, and I think that we'll probably hover around that area going forward. But like I said, with the requesting up to 10, just kind of gives us a little wiggle room. We're kind of limited by the weather, so, and we can't really do more than 1 event realistically a month, maybe 2. So we're limited in a number of ways there as well.
Fair enough. And then my last question, only because it was brought up at some point, how many people are at these events on average?
Yeah, it varies widely. It's hard to say as well, because most of the events are kind of longer lasting, and they're designed for people to kind of pop in and pop out. Our Halloween party last year, I would say, was maybe 400 people or so, maybe 500, filtered throughout the evening.
Yeah. Okay, I was going to ask. So most of those people are already walking in the district anyway?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Okay, we'll have you have a seat, and then I will open the public hearing. If anyone from the public is here to speak on this, please approach the microphone, introduce yourself, and address commission.
Hi there, my name is Julia Crawford. I'm the property manager for a 4-unit apartment building located at 930 Wealthy, right next door to and in front of Speciation Cellars. And I'm concerned about the noise from the live entertainment in the residential area, specifically as it relates to my building, as I have a tenant's building, or a bedroom, located really about approximately 27 feet from the corner of their building. In the past, I've received phone calls or text messages from my tenants complaining about the noise from the bands over at Speciation Ales. Since I wasn't over at the property at those times or near there, I felt that my only recourse was to tell my tenants to call the police and complain. I'm here to let you know that I'm very concerned about providing my tenants quiet enjoyment of their rentals when they've got bands playing just feet away from their windows. Whether or not their doors are open or not, it's very loud. And I'm just not sure how I'm going to manage that going forward with tenants who, I don't know, they do have bands in the past. They were loud, so I'm just concerned, and I want to let you know that. Thank you for your time.
I'd like to thank the commission for taking input on this. My name is Tim Griffith. I'm the owner of the building that Julie manages for us. And my principal residence is in Dayton, Ohio, but when I saw the notice of this event, this was important enough to make the trip up for sure, and to share my very serious concerns about what's happening here. I frankly think there's a problem that exists even today, pre-approval of any special permit to allow for bands and alcohol sales outside. Just because we've, again, as you heard from Julia Crawford, we've had multiple tenants complain about the noise and ask us to do something about it. Again, as Julia suggested, we generally will direct her to the police. I know Grand Rapids doesn't have a specific decibel limit. I think in 19, it looks like the city approved sort of a reasonable standard in terms of what could make sense without getting specific on decibels. But I can tell you, even alcohol service outside, as you can imagine, when you get multiple people drinking, even the ambient noise itself, I think, starts to press against what is a reasonable amount of noise. Julia shared with you that we've got tenants who are less than 30 feet away from this property, whose bedroom windows are there separate only by a pane of glass from all that's going on next door. And again, we are certainly not opposed to, you know, live music in town and outdoor beer. The issue here is that it's right in the middle of a residential neighborhood. This is not a bar district. This is not a downtown location where people aren't living. This is, and it's just not our building. There are, as you can see from the maps, there are apartment buildings directly across the street, on both sides, and behind this property. So I had hoped more of those folks would show up today to express the same concern that any of this activity, frankly, compromises people's ability to have quiet enjoyment of their properties. Again, we love the fact that Grand Rapids has a sort of a nice, young, hip vibe that allows for outdoor music and potential outdoor alcohol service. The issue is that this is right in the middle of a neighborhood. This is not where this needs to happen. And again, you know, as an example, our current tenant in apartment D, who is directly on the property line, is a medical school student. She does her work, her rounds begin very early every day, so she's in bed at 9:30 at night every night just to make sure that she's there. So, I mean, you can't control for that, but one thing that we absolutely want to provide our residents is quiet enjoyment of the property. And what is already happening there, I think, is problematic. Clearly, approving something like this is going to compound the issues that already exist, and would encourage the commission to reject this application and suggest that this activity needs to happen somewhere that's not right in the middle of a residential area. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Anyone else on this case? Okay, I will close the public hearing. All right, would you like to come up and address any of the comments made?
Thanks for bringing up that. To be honest, we've been operating for a long time. I've only ever gotten one direct complaint from a neighbor, and that was recently, and we addressed it and took care of it immediately with him. And it was kind of an outlier because we had left a window open, and so we didn't realize that the window was open, and so it was extra loud. So we took care of it right away. I kind of understand where you're coming from. At the same time, it's not a completely residential neighborhood. We have Squibb across the street.
Just, you could address us, yep.
Sorry. And we have the Meanwhile Bar, maybe about 50 yards away from us as well. So there are other alcohol licenses in the area. Also, I feel like we've been very respectful of all of our neighbors, and we've addressed every concern that's been brought up to us. I will also say, in the past, in the first couple of years of the business, we primarily did have metal bands and hardcore bands and really like loud music, and we have really backed off of that, and we've been focusing on like local jazz bands and indie bands and that kind of stuff. So I will say the volume has dropped down. We still have the windows shut, the doors shut, and when you are in that area, if you're outside and there's a band playing, you can hear the rumbling, but it's not like you can hear the whole live music. I know that's kind of vague, and it probably doesn't really show you the example of what it sounds like unless you're there at the building. But that's probably what I have to say about it.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Kristen, would you walk us through what the ordinance does say about limits? And then I'm also curious about, in terms of the event permitting, like what is that process like? Are you going through with applicants, like where their stages are and what kinds of things goes into that approval process?
Mm-hmm. So yes, each event application, special event application or temporary use event, we do look at the setup. There's, of course, building code reviews relative to electrical connections and such, if there's tents and such. But we do look at the setup. We look at where the stage is located, the orientation of the stage, the orientation of the speakers. Sometimes there's associated parking that has to be looked at depending on the application, not here. And then we also look at what are the anticipated hours of the event. And then there's just safety flow for occupancy limits and such.
And for the hours of events, are they governed by what would be in a resolution here, or can they deviate from what?
So typically, the zoning or the planning, I'm looking at Mr. Hooker to bail me out in case I misspeak. Typically, the special land use permit process is what would, or any resolution, is what we would utilize to determine what are the hours of operation for a particular event. There is some overlap, of course, with the noise control ordinance, more about how the noise is heard with respect to where the lot line or the public property is from the noise from the public way.
Yeah, in the staff report, packet page 72 has the language from the noise control ordinance related to entertainment and commercial property. So that ordinance would still apply regardless of your approval. Like Kristen said, your approval could include operating hours. These provisions 9.64 that are highlighted in the staff report would still apply, and there are different hours, as you can see. So essentially, to summarize, for an entertainment or commercial business, it ratchets up after 10 p.m. on weekdays and then 1 p.m. on weekends. 1 a.m., sorry. Yep.
Thanks.
Yep.
But that's not to say there can't be activity in the hours that are different. It's the volume of
Correct.
the noise
Yeah.
that is managed.
There's more latitude during daytime hours and less during nighttime hours for these types of businesses.
Okay.
And there'd be obviously full city enforcement authority under that provision, independent of land use approval.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. All right, other commissioners have questions or comments?
I
Oh,
got
go
a
ahead.
question. I'm honestly just curious. For issues like this, I know when we talked a lot about the amphitheater, we talked a lot about sound and where that's going to. But for issues on sound, who do people contact, or is it just always the police for issues regarding sound? Is there a place for the city city planning department where that happens,
Yeah.
or?
You can feel free to chime in, Kristen, but I think the preferred method would be 311 for neighborhood complaints. PD has a non-emergency number, but I think 311 would be the preferred method to channel that complaint in.
And then following up on that, what's the response if you call 311 and not the police? Does somebody go out there and check and write up an infraction if it's over the limit?
I don't know if I, as an assistant city attorney, could speak to that, and I defer to the 311 department on their management to respond, but I know that they diligently track complaints that come in,
Okay.
and then their process is geared towards a proactive city response based on the circumstances. But I think a referral could certainly be made to PD, or there could be enforcement action that comes out of a neighborhood complaint. But everything is logged and tracked and responded to.
Typically, those 311 complaints around noise would then come through to the planning department because of the nature of the land use regulations. And then we work with our liaisons from GRPD with code compliance
Okay.
and develop an enforcement action plan.
Okay.
So I feel like we're getting a little bit of conflicting information about this particular case. So do we have a log of calls for the property? Does that exist? Because I know we have it sometimes for like gas stations and other things where we approve alcohol, but is there something that exists for this property specifically,
No.
or history?
We were not aware of any complaints or problems, so we didn't ask the police department to run a report for us. We've reached out to them now. I haven't heard back yet.
Yeah, and we did also receive several letters from direct neighbors too, indicating that those in particular hadn't had issues, but I feel like the feedback has been heard that there have been some issues, whether voiced or not, but.
It feels like,
Alyssa,
can I?
Oh.
Oh, go ahead.
We have had 2 noise complaints in the past 2 years. February 1st, 2024, and May 5th. That must have been 2023.
Okay.
Or, yeah.
All right, thank you. Yes. Okay. 2 noise complaints have been received, one in February of 2024 and one in May of 2023.
Yes.
Thank you.
Those were to the police.
To the police. Okay. Thank you.
I want to clarify, I have a question in that what's before us today is the outdoor entertainment, not the entertainment inside, right? So what's happening inside is not under our purview at this point. It's just the outdoor entertainment. And do you know, I'm assuming that the noise in February would have been an interior a complaint about what was going on inside the establishment.
Yeah, and I think we heard from testimony that they haven't had outdoor shows because they weren't allowed to.
Yeah.
Per testimony, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
If I could just say, I'm sorry, was you asking questions or, okay. There was a few mentions about like just the character of this neighborhood, and I feel like that's very difficult because this area in particular is in the middle of a transition. Obviously, there's residences here. We see that there are houses, but this is also an area where we want to be walkable, where we want to be lively, and for people to come and to have a drink, to have a good time. And so I feel like any neighborhood, any area in the middle of a transition like this, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be very hard. That said, I would agree, generally speaking, I'm sure anybody would, that you don't want to be trying to enjoy the comfort of your own home at any hour and be blasted with music. I've got a neighbor like that right now who's blasting music. His speaker's directed towards my house right now, and I really hope he's watching. And luckily, it's music I enjoy, but I don't necessarily want to hear it all day. It is not fun, and it definitely encroaches upon the enjoyment upon that. That being said, I live in a 100% residential neighborhood, and this is a neighborhood in transition where you're next to these businesses where, right, the city, we're trying to get people to come out to places like this. So I don't know, for me, it's a hard decision, but what is not difficult, and luckily, it doesn't have to be difficult or hard because I think the ordinance covers this, is those noise levels during certain hours of the day, especially the critical times of the night, whether on the weekend or the weekday, is controlled already. There are already ordinances in place that prevent that noise level. So if between now and 2 years from now, there was a heavy metal band to come up in Grand Rapids and they wanted to do a show at this place, they won't be able to do it at 10 p.m. on a Thursday night. So I think that helps us in this case, but at all other times, I'm wondering if the commission is amenable to approving this, and I am in general support of this, if the hours can be reduced significantly to make sure that we are not encroaching it upon the latter parts of the evening.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly appropriate and part of our decision today. So yeah, I'd welcome input on that.
It seems that the parameters are such that these events are people coming and going, in many cases, like the Halloween. And I really appreciate the folks that came out to talk to us about this, because we're right. This is over 20 years we've seen this change from closed-up shop fronts to a lot more activity, which is a good part of the neighborhood, and it can interfere when you've got mixed use like this. But 9 o'clock seems pretty reasonable to me, and the limited times and the ability to lodge a complaint and have it investigated, not that you want to be complaining all the time, and given that, you know, for the outdoor part, it looks like we've just had one complaint. It sounds like the owner is amenable to making sure, by the kind of entertainment that you have, that it is respectful of the neighbors.
I agree. Yeah, go ahead.
Can we ask the applicant what he would prefer for that end time? I'm just curious if, you mentioned afternoon events, so I don't want to arbitrarily decide.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I guess I want to first clarify whether you're talking about live bands inside now, or are we talking about the current outside?
So it looks like in the resolution, we have two options to set a time. One is outdoor, and the other is indoor with open door.
Okay, got it. Thanks for that clarification. 9 p.m. I think is, for me, a reasonable time to have all live amplified sounds done with for the day on the weekends.
Outside and with the door open, right? Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, let's talk about the other elements of the case as well, the patio seating, alcohol sales, parking.
It seems that, you know, COVID has now morphed into this great network of outdoor spaces that remain. Hopefully, we never go through a COVID again, but I think it's really, one of the good things that came out of all of that was this idea of really having interaction on our streets, and it continues. I think it's positive. What's happened along Wealthy Street continues to astound me from 20 years ago when like I said, when you had more boarded up and liquor stores and bars and windows than now all of these open spaces, people wandering, a mix of retail, restaurant, and residential. I really think this is a great idea. I like the kind of events outside, the little fair and things like that, which I think draw in the neighborhood as well as maybe people visiting it. And so I just hope that the sound thing can be managed in a way that it doesn't interfere with people's enjoyment of their space, you know, and that they can coexist, which is a part of, you know, I live downtown, and part of downtown too. You hear music from time to time, and I'm hopeful that I can hear free music when the amphitheater goes up of the music I like. So it's both a benefit and something I think you have to work with the neighbors too.
Others?
I don't have any specific details to go into. I appreciate the neighbors' concerns about noise, but in general, I'm in support of the 10 events, the 9 p.m. cutoff for outdoor live entertainment or doors open out live entertainment. I think I don't have any issue with parking reductions here. I don't. So I'm in support.
Can I say for the record too, just, I'm sure this is very clear, but with the cutoff time, like, it's a light switch. It is cut off. Like, the cutoff time is a hard 9 p.m. It is not a 9:15. It is not a 9:30. It is a very, very hard 9 p.m.
Okay, yeah, I'm in support of this as well. I think I appreciate the applicant's willingness to work with neighbors and desire to want to be a good neighbor. And with the parameters that we're setting, I think hopefully it allows everyone in the neighborhood both to enjoy the events that are happening, but also have good periods of quiet time as well. I'm not concerned about the parking. I anticipate that many of the people attending these events are coming directly from the neighborhood and walking and biking and all of that stuff. So, and with the parking lot across the way, that'll be good too. So yeah, I'd welcome a motion or yeah.
Just one other question. I'm noticing in the resolution, there's two blanks that outdoor events shall not exceed X number of events or X number of days per year. So I just again want to confirm with the applicant, 10 events and 10 days, one event per day, or, okay, great, thank you.
I think we could also give them a little more wiggle room on the number of days too, if it's not like more than 2 consecutive days per event.
Great, yeah, thank you.
Okay. Everyone good? All right, go ahead.
I can go ahead and make this motion. This is it, folks.
Make them all.
This is it. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the special land use and site plan review request of Speciation Artisan Ales, I don't know what my problem is with that, LLC, Mitch and Whitney, Irma Dinger, to establish a permanent outdoor seating area with alcohol service in association with an existing microbrewery tasting room and up to 10 outdoor events with live entertainment per year at 928 Wealthy Street Southeast for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the proposed use will support the intent of a neighborhood center by contributing to the mix of small-scale restaurant and entertainment uses that reinforce a vibrant pedestrian environment, contribute to an active and inclusive public realm by providing a space for social interaction, CMP 5, promote active and vibrant mixed-use environments in an appropriate location and intensity. The proposed use will meet the site plan review standards of section 5.12.08.E because no site changes are proposed and site alterations for events will be temporary. The proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment, because the proposed use will support the desired mixed-use character of the neighborhood. The outdoor seating area has been operating without incident since its emergency pandemic establishment and is not proposed to change. An adequate parking will be provided for events through private parking agreements. Potentially adverse effects arising from the proposed use will be minimized because appropriate landscaping is proposed to buffer the use from abutting residential uses, and adequate parking is provided on properties within 300 feet, and alternative forms of transportation are available within the district to support the demand. The proposed use will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future uses or to the public welfare because outdoor seating hours of operation are similar to other uses in the vicinity, and events will be held on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, and hours will be limited. The proposed use will not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or otherwise hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment because no permanent site or building changes are proposed. The proposed use will not be detrimental to the financial stability or economic welfare of the city because the use is not anticipated to result in nuisances that require excessive code enforcement actions given the proposed scale and hours. Given the character, location, development trends, and other aspects of the neighborhood, the proposed location for alcohol sales will demonstrably be an asset to the neighborhood because, as proposed, the use will be unique as compared to existing uses in the neighborhood, and the theme-based events are intended to serve a wide range of interest. The use or change in use as constructed and operated by the applicant is compatible with the neighborhood because the taproom and outdoor seating area have been in operation for several years without incident, and support for the proposed establishment has been expressed. The use, as proposed, will be operated by the applicant, will minimize or eliminate negative secondary effects on the neighborhood because the establishment has an adequate training and security plan, and the proposed duration of events will be limited. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this approval. Standard condition set A approvals. They're on the screen, and I'll read them. That the application and plans submitted by the applicant and signed, dated, and stamped by the planning director shall constitute the approved plans, except if plan elements do not meet ordinance requirements and/or as amended in this resolution. 2, that the use shall operate according to the application and per testimony as recorded in the Planning Commission minutes. 3, that this approval does not include any proposed signs, and any future sign shall be subject to the requirements of Article 15 of the ordinance and permits received prior to installation. 4, that the land use development services, LUDS permit, building permit, and all other required permits be obtained from the City of Grand Rapids prior to construction, demolition, or operation. 5, that any expansion of the approved special land use requires an additional special land use review and approval by the Planning Commission. 6, that the proposed use will comply with all other applicable city ordinances and policies and all state laws. 7, that the approval shall take effect 16 calendar days after the date of the Planning Commission's decisions. Number 2, that the hours of operation of the outdoor seating area shall be consistent with and close no later than regular hours of operation for the tap room, being no later than 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday and 11 p.m. Friday and Saturday. That the outdoor events shall not exceed 10 events of no more than 2 consecutive days. That the outdoor live entertainment associated with events shall be permitted with low volume amplification no later than 9 p.m. The indoor live entertainment associated with events shall be permitted with the overhead door open no later than 9 p.m. That the overhead door shall be closed during all other times of live amplified sound. That the applicant shall apply for a temporary use permit for each event and work with staff to ensure that the site plan meets the life safety and ADA requirements. And 8, that a copy of the parking agreement with 811 Wealthy Street, which is Wellspring Church, be provided with application for temporary use permit for events.
Question, I thought the applicant said that they weren't able to get written approval for the parking in the church.
What's your suggestion on that? Right. The parking agreement, they don't have a formal written parking agreement.
Laura, do you have a thought on that?
I wonder if we could amend that, if it would work, that for each event, the applicant could provide some written correspondence from the property owner at 811 Wealthy Street for use of that parking lot for that event. Maybe that could be submitted with each temporary use permit application.
Or just some sort of confirmation of parking arrangement to support the event?
Right, it doesn't have to be a formal agreement, but some indication in
Written
email or a
plan.
letter to the city.
I also noticed that Reagan Marketing had offered some parking, so maybe not specific to the address, but just in general, yeah.
Good idea.
That, how about we say that written,
That the applicant provide written documentation of their parking plan for each event application,
sounds great.
which is inherent, if they're using other people's property, we would require verification of that, of course.
Okay.
Okay, I have a motion. Oh, one more question.
So in the standard conditions and approvals, number 3, I was kind of thinking that was going to end up being 10 events or 10 days per year, but the math is now 10 events or 20 days per year, because you said up to 2 days per event.
Right.
Just clarifying that that's not an issue.
I think, I don't want to speak for you, Commissioner, but
Oh, how many days you are letting them do it?
for the condition
one.
number 3,
Here, this part.
I think the idea was that there's only 10 events that are permitted, but that each event could be a maximum of 2 consecutive days.
Right.
That we would not always be allowing 3 consecutive day events per
Oh,
I thought.
so
we
if there's
were
a
saying-
Friday, Saturday, Sunday, are we limiting
We would be with the language that
what
was
we
spoken,
just,
yes.
right?
Do you want to amend it then to have different, just a number of days?
They're limited to Friday, Saturday, Sunday already based on the request. So the maximum number of days in a calendar year that events could take place would be, of course, 30. So you could just leave it at 10 events per year, period.
I think I'm comfortable with that. Is everyone else comfortable with that?
Yep.
Okay.
Great.
All right, so let's amend
Condition 3.
Condition 3 to that outdoor events shall not exceed 10 events per calendar year.
Awesome, all right.
Great.
The only other
Catch, thank you.
friendly offering is in 3A of the conditions. You state that for neighborhood effect, that outdoor seating has been operating without incident, and perhaps it's without unresolved incident, since we did hear per testimony today that there were 2 complaints.
And just to clarify, that's also at E3 under sale or and/or consumption of alcohol. Taproom and outdoor seating area have been in operation for several years without incident.
Okay, we have a motion, do we have support?
Support.
All right, support by Commissioner Shannon. Any other discussion? Good discussion, everybody.
That's good.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move on to our next case, 821 Cottage Grove Southeast. Oh, okay, okay. You can go ahead, Avery.
All right. The next item on the agenda is a request to construct a new 3-unit residential dwelling in the TN LDR Zone District at 821 Cottage Grove Street Southeast. This case is before you today as multiple family residential developments of 3 units or more require special land use approval. The 2024 Community Master Plan Future Character and Land Use Map designates this area as compact neighborhood. The site is surrounded by TN LDR residentially zoned properties, with the property to the south being a manufacturing use. The 6,500 square foot vacant property is located between Hall and Burton Street Southeast, just east of Eastern Avenue Southeast. The site is currently unimproved, as you can see in the image. Green space that is largely flat with little to no grade change, and it has alley access to the rear. For the proposed development, all site layout, building elements, and parking requirements will be met with 3 exceptions. The first being the entrance to the lower level unit, as shown here. It is clearly defined. However, it is located on the east side elevation of the development rather than the front facade, which the main level shown here, or this one, and then the upper level entrance here are on the front facade. The Planning Commission should consider whether this side entrance location adequately meets the zoning ordinance requirements for orientation. The second exception, multiple family developments are required to connect all units to both the public sidewalk and off-street parking areas. This requirement can be rectified through a condition of approval to require connectivity between the rear parking pad here and the public sidewalk at the front here by extending this internal walkway on the site to the front to facilitate pedestrian orientation and circulation of the site. Lastly, Cottage Grove Street Southeast is a neighborhood residential street type, and the Planning Commission should consider whether this development is appropriate for a neighborhood residential street type. The applicant has met with Garfield Parks Neighborhood Association and Link Up and a letter of support has been submitted by Garfield Parks Neighborhood Association. In summary, we ask the Planning Commission to consider the impact of a 3-unit dwelling on the desired character of the surrounding neighborhood, the compatibility of the proposed structure with the architectural character of the neighborhood, whether the proposed site plan provides efficient, livable use of the property, whether the entrance to the lower level unit adequately meets the zoning ordinance requirements for building entrance, orientation, and whether a neighborhood residential street type is appropriate for this development. Does the Planning Commission have any questions for me at this time?
Any questions? Okay, thanks, Avery. All right, we'll have you come up and add anything you'd like.
Good afternoon, city staff, everyone else who's present as well too. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Orlando Garcia, and I am the applicant for the 821 Cottage Grove Street Southeast location here, the development going on. I'd like to give you guys a brief overview of the project. It's pretty much a 3-unit triplex stacked, so you got your lower level, your main level, and your upper unit. A total of 10 bedrooms and 6 bathrooms. It is designed to fit the neighborhood's look and feel and impact the area in a positive way. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
From the drawing, I'm trying to understand for the lower level, what kind of transparency there is in terms of, windows and...
Yep. So we've got windows on the left side. So if you're looking at it from the front, you got window wells on the left side, and then you also got some on the right there as well too. I don't have...
It is...
So light into the bedrooms and the living room
Yep.
area.
Window wells.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yep. So you've got a window. You've got a window on that left side there so that if you look at it from the top, you're pretty much you got a window on the living space. So living room, a window well for the kitchen, and then one for each room as well too.
And you enter the downstairs on the side there.
Yep, through the east side.
Got it. Okay.
Any other questions?
Can you speak to your choice about having, how you chose the main floor elevation? It looks like both the neighboring properties, the main floor elevation is probably 30 inches above grade, where this one's a foot, maybe. Unless I was looking at the wrong, it's hard to tell in this image. I might have been looking at the wrong properties, but I guess, yeah, how did you choose your main floor elevation?
So the way I chose the elevation was I wanted to have the tenants have some nice tall ceilings. So in order to do that, we needed to do 9-foot ceilings at the basement to cover up for any HVAC work, any plumbing, anything that goes like that below the joists, below the actual main floor, to be able to allow to still meet the requirement from the city of the 7-foot ceilings. So pretty much we had to do 9-foot ceilings. Well, we didn't have to, but it was just thought it was.
I think you might misunderstand my question.
Okay.
My question is, why isn't the whole house out of the ground further? It would make your basement unit nicer. It would make the home's relationship to the street more appropriate. It would increase comfort between people hanging out on the porch and people walking by on the sidewalk, because when you're at equal elevations in those circumstances, it's less comfortable. So that's what I was asking, was how you chose how far to put the house in the ground, or how many steps it is up to the first floor.
So the draftsman that drew up the plans and everything like that, he had to set up the standards based on regulations in the area. So that's how we came up with the height.
Would there be an opportunity for you to consider elevating
Yes.
the building taller?
Yes,
'Cause
I believe so. I think it's around 5 feet extra that we could probably raise the building higher. So it's something we could definitely do.
Yeah, in traditional neighborhoods, we typically see that first floor, so not your basement, but your first floor, finished floor, to be about 18, 24 inches above a sidewalk, for example. So elevating that, so you'd have a couple of more steps going up into your porch. I think, Commissioner, I don't want to speak for you, but I think that that's what you're suggesting, is having a couple more steps up to the porch to elevate the finished floor of the first floor
Makes sense.
to
Yeah.
be a little bit higher. So if you're willing to consider that, we can certainly work with you at a staff level to support that.
For sure. Yeah, I'm willing to do that. Yeah.
And that would provide a little more window space, transparency on the lower level, right?
It would, because it'd bring the volume of the basement level more above grade, so you'd have more light coming
Yeah,
in.
I see what he's saying now. You were saying pretty much like the foundation right now looks pretty low and flushed with the grade. And you're saying like raise that up a little.
Correct. It should save you money, other than building some steps. But you won't have to excavate as far, your window wells won't be as deep, and the home's relationship to the street will be improved.
Makes sense.
So.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, anything else?
I'm just generally curious. I don't think this has anything to do with this particular case, but for houses like this, it doesn't seem as accessible to someone who may be in a wheelchair. Is that a requirement, or is that something that we should think about like this?
So anytime you have less than 4 units, I don't think there are any accessibility requirements.
So when it's,
Okay.
And there is always opportunity to add ramps, should that be necessary for either desirable by the property owner or the tenants. That's certainly something that can be added as part of the design if that's desired at a later date.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe 3 units and up is commercial, which is maybe why they actually made this little lower, is to comply with ADA as well too, to answer your question.
But I see what you're saying. But it looks like they don't have to. It's not required unless there's 4 more units.
My understanding of the building code is that if you have 3 units or less, you do not have any accessibility requirements.
That's correct, yep.
We run into this a lot because I can't remember what they call, I can't remember what they call them. But any 2-story that's got mixed use or it's got a retail on the first floor and apartments on the second floor, you run into it a lot where you only end up with 3 units because otherwise you need either a unit on the main floor or an elevator.
Yep, that's correct.
Gotcha.
So this, as currently drawn, does not have any accessibility requirements.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Anything else? We'll have you sit down and we'll do the public hearing. All right, I'll open the public hearing. If you're here from the public on this case and would like to speak to it, come up to the mic and address commission. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and turn to commissioners for discussion. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask the attorney a question?
Yeah.
So there was stated about 3 units and up being commercial. I thought that was 6 units and up is really commercial.
It's not for commercial, it's for residential housing. If there are 4 more units, then it has to comply with the ADA for accessibility.
Right. What's the number for commercial being labeled commercial versus residential?
Commercial properties?
Yeah.
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Okay.
But like, okay.
It sounded like the applicant got a really good money advice on how to save some money, and so I'm wondering if he would want us to table this and he can bring us back a new plan instead of us deciding on this one, or?
I think Kristen's suggestion that it be handled at a staff level is more than appropriate. I think that staff understands those relationships between dwelling units in the street well enough to figure it out with the applicant, in my opinion.
Okay, so do we have to approve this, or?
Yeah, it's still a special land use because of the three.
Gotcha.
because of
Yes.
Because it's 3 units in a
I see.
residential area.
Okay.
So any conditions can be administered by staff. So for example, the walkway to connect the basement door to the front sidewalk, we can handle that administratively. If material to the use is a request that the finished floor of the home be elevated to 1824 inches above grade, we can handle all that administratively without an issue.
Oh, perfect.
Awesome.
I think, I'm supportive of this. I like the idea of raising it up, not only because, and I like the idea that you have a front porch. I think that adds to the vibrancy of the neighborhood and some area for tenants to gather. And the idea of raising it up so that you get both that height, but the added transparency to the lower level. We're needing housing. This is a vacant lot. And I think that this is a very needed and appropriate project. Thank you. And I'd be willing to make a motion after discussion,
Sure.
if you want.
Sure, yeah, thanks. Yeah, no,
I'm ahead of myself.
No, I'm in support as well. Also, I think the orientation of that entrance for the bottom unit is appropriate in this case, just because there are 3 units here and it's marked clearly. And yeah, I would be in support of staff working with the applicant to connect those sidewalks and the parking pad. I think it's great that we're doing infill development, and I appreciate that the unit sizes are appropriate for lots of different kinds of households. So that's exciting too. And then I did just want to say, and this might be something that we talk about further as we move forward with the zoning ordinance update, but in terms of the requirement of the multiple family dwelling should not be located on a residential street, it seems like to me that a triplex is small enough that it ultimately, hopefully, eventually might not be classified in this way. Like, it's only 3 units that I think that's appropriate for being in the middle of a neighborhood like we're suggesting right now, but obviously that's a broader question to think about later. Anyway. Anybody else have anything they want to say? All right, I'll turn over to you, Commissioner.
Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Commission approves the special land use and site plan review request of Orlando Garcia Rodas to construct a new 3-unit residential dwelling in the TN LDR Zone District at 821 Cottage Grove Street Southeast for the following reasons. The proposed use will be consistent with the purpose and intent of the master plan and zoning ordinance, including the zone district, because the development will contribute to a greater variety of housing types in a low-density residential zone district. This is in the 2024 Community Master Plan Great Neighborhoods recommendation. The proposed use will meet the site plan review standards of sections 5.12.08.e because the site has been harmoniously and efficiently organized in relation to the size and type of lot, character of the neighborhood, and adjoining structures. The site design incorporates adequate means of ingress and egress with walkways connecting the units to either the public sidewalk or parking pad. The parking pad located at the alley will provide safe and convenient vehicular access to the 5 on-site parking spaces provided. The proposed use will be compatible, harmonious, and appropriate with the character and uses of the neighborhood, adjacent properties, and the natural environment because the proposed structures are consistent in scale and orientation with what is desired in the TN neighborhood classification. The proposed use will result in a density appropriate for the area. The proposed use will not have adverse effects on the neighborhood because adequate on-site and street parking will be available. Buildings, structures, and entrances are appropriately oriented on the site. The proposed uses will not be detrimental, hazardous, or disturbing to existing or future uses or to the public welfare by reason of excessive traffic, noise, or visual clutter because vehicular access to the property will be from the alley. This will be residential use in a residential area. The parking area will be buffered from the adjacent property by a 6-foot-high privacy fence. The proposed use would not adversely affect the walkability of the neighborhood, impair pedestrian circulation patterns, disrupt the continuity of the urban street wall, or otherwise hinder the creation of a pedestrian-oriented environment because the proposed building will be set back consistent with properties on the same side of the block. The placement of the house, entrances, and rear yard parking reflect a pedestrian orientation. Adequate public or private infrastructure and services already exist or will be provided at the developer's cost. The infill development and provision of additional housing units will support a complete and stable neighborhood. The proposed use would not be detrimental to the financial stability and economic welfare of the city because the additional dwelling units will contribute to the tax base and support the nearby business district. The proposed development will encourage additional investment in the neighborhood. Be it further resolved that the following conditions of approval shall apply to this project. Standard conditions, set A approvals, are on the screen. That's number 1. Number 2, that the basement window well shall be maintained free of debris and snow to ensure safe egress. Number 2, that the adequate fall protection is provided in accordance with building code requirements as the egress window well on the east side elevation is in close proximity to this sidewalk. Number 4, that all units have pedestrian access to the rear parking pad and to the public sidewalk. Can I add to that? I think we've got a couple to add here if you have language, otherwise I'll improvise, but if you have it.
I had one that said that the applicant work with staff to increase the finished floor elevation to be more consistent with that of neighboring properties.
Yes. And did we want that pedestrian access to the rear parking pad and public sidewalk? Oh, that's, I get that.
Yeah,
So that one's it. Okay, I think we're good. And that's the resolution.
Support.
All right. Motion by Shannon, support by Swem. Any further discussion? Everybody in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you so much. All right, and now we will move into Planning Commission discussion of off-street parking as a second principal use.
Thank you, Commission. This is a continuation of a discussion that we very briefly started at the last Planning Commission meeting. I'm going to turn it over to Rowan Brady to provide a review of our interpretation and of the circumstances that we're finding have been coming up in the city, specifically around the use of off-street parking lots for a second primary use. As we, I think, conveyed at our last meeting, planning staff has made the interpretation that the use of parking as separate from the primary use is considered a second primary use. So in anticipation of potential cases moving forward, we wanted to provide you with an overview of why we think that, and then also whether there's any material that might be helpful as cases presumably would come forward for the Planning Commission's consideration, so that you feel prepared as you deliberate these potential requests. So with that, I'll ask Rowan to elaborate.
Yeah, thank you, Director Turkelson. The planning interpretation memo should be in the packets that explains the position in full. I believe it's about 2 pages long. As Director Turkelson mentioned, when we have parking lots that are either primarily accessory parking lots, meaning those parking spaces are associated with an existing business or a use, that then put up signage for Air Park or Air Garage, which is the pay for space signs that you see around the city where you can pull into the parking space, scan a QR code with your phone, pay $2, $3, $4 to park there for an hour. That is establishing a second primary use on the property as public off-street parking because those spaces are changing from accessory related to one use or one business to now public spaces. Public off-street parking is a special land use in all zone districts except 2, being the Special District Industrial Transportation District or the MONC zone district, which is primarily 28th Street. So most of the areas that we're seeing these pop up are in the city center and the TNCCC, kind of originating around Bridge Street and then expanding throughout the downtown. We are seeing a lot more of those pop up, and as planning department staff is giving guidance on those applicants and property owners to come in for special land use, we wanted to give you an opportunity to ask staff for any documentation or any resources that would be helpful in your decision making as these cases come before you. So we're happy to have a discussion on what materials you would like to see or what you would like us to look into, so when you do have a case before you next, we have the required documentation that you requested.
Awesome, thank you. Any folks have immediate questions?
Okay, I wasn't here at the last meeting, and this is the first I've ever heard of air parking.
Really?
Whatever. So a person would set aside in their parking lot places where people could use this and pay. Is that assuming the rest of it is not paid or it's allocated to someone?
Yeah, it depends. I would also like to clarify, I'm using the phrase Air Park or Air Garage. Those are specific operators. This is generally a practice of like pay per space parking. So I'm using them as a pseudo. I'm not intending to call out one specific company. I'm using it as a proxy for a larger process, but we've seen kind of combinations of entire parking lots being converted to these pay per space models, or portions of those parking lots being converted to pay per space models. Of course, that has implications for existing uses and businesses that need those spaces to satisfy ordinance requirements for spaces, especially outside the TNCCC and those districts that require a certain number of parking spaces per use. So there are implications for existing uses and businesses.
Yeah, that was going to be my question. So what is the process for that relating to how businesses are meeting their parking requirements if these lots are being converted?
Yeah, so if there are uses that are in zone districts that have parking requirements, which are all of them except the TNCCC, I anticipate an operator coming before you asking for special land use for this use and likely a parking reduction for their existing business, or some sort of shared use parking agreement where the pay per space is only for certain hours during the day when the use or business is not in operation.
Okay.
What we are also conscientious of, and I think the ordinance was structured this way, is, we want to be also mindful of how these leases are structured, to make sure that we're not encumbering, or ideally, I think we'd be concerned if a property were encumbered indefinitely with lease arrangements that would maybe preclude future redevelopment. And that's probably getting into more case-by-case situations, but we do have that with billboards, for example, where we have a whole billboard exchange program centered around how do we provide flexibility for the billboard to not encumber future redevelopment. And so I think the ordinance is structured intentionally for us to be mindful of future implications where we have these maybe competing interests.
Yeah, that was something I wrote down when I was reviewing this too, about hampering new development with these. And then you pointed us to like some specific language in the various planning documents we have, and discouraging new parking lots. And so I guess we would consider these to be new, or, as they relate to those planning documents, like is establishing this permission to have the second primary use, would staff consider that approving new parking lots?
I would consider it an establishment of a new use on the property. I would defer to the planning director on the specific, it's existing parking, so
Just looking at the
Yeah, I think it's existing infrastructure, but it's establishing a new use on the property as a standalone, publicly available parking lot.
Kind of intensifying use for existing parking lots, whereas a new parking lot, I assume, would require LUD's review and all that kind of thing, right? Additional city approvals. Yeah.
Theoretically, or. I'm trying to think of other things that we would need to know when considering these cases, other than like when they would, if there were limiting hours or complementary hours to existing businesses, what else is in our purview to condition or consider when we're looking at these cases as they come?
Isn't it, if I'm understanding right, it's a matter of taking what already is an existing parking lot, there's rules and regulations on what, hours of operation, I don't know what the rules are around it, but then you're adding to that a pay component, so it's not reserved. It's a pet peeve of mine when I drive around and you're looking for a parking place and you see an empty parking lot reserved for a bar at 9 o'clock at night, and nothing's happening there and how it could support the neighborhood. And so it seems like we're just adding a layer of accessibility to it. So what kind of other, I'm trying to think, what other kinds of restrictions would you have other than, I just don't know, because the owner would just have people paying on the spot instead of paying through their drink or paying by renting out the whole thing.
So from a documentation standpoint, I think everything that's been discussed up until now makes sense. I don't think it's overly complicated. We need to know how many spaces they're supposed to have and how many they're going to have. I came prepared to talk about something completely different because I didn't know we were just talking about what documents we were going to see. So I apologize for not paying attention. That's a really interesting topic. Because I love the idea that we're potentially making it so we don't have like single-use parking or parking that is dedicated. But at the same time, by monetizing the parking, I have additional questions that probably can't be answered here today because I didn't ask ahead of time and we probably don't have. But like, if we're approving parking that was like a debt service to an office use previously, but now it's income generating, does that, and I mean, it should, can it change the taxable value of the property so that the city's at least benefiting from?
Absolutely, yeah.
It seems to me, particularly in downtown, and now I've seen them up and down Bridge Street, there's a place that has one, but I always, in my mind, think a parking lot is a development waiting to happen, that at some point, the value of that, just as a parking lot, even if you're having people pay, is superseded by the value of.
But it doesn't.
Rent. It doesn't?
The Ellis lot on Monroe Center is a great example of it.
Yeah, but the Ellis lot over there got redeveloped. Because, for years, that was a parking lot over there where the hotel is now.
Depending on parking rates and other things, I mean, there's a lot of, I tried to dig into it and there's way more than I understand about how people look at property, but a parking lot can be a really secure investment. If it's got a lot of turnover with decent rates, there's pretty low risk to keep it. In general, if you look at taxable values of parking lots next to buildings that are adjacent to them, they're a fraction of the taxable value, so taxes aren't that high. So it's very possible for surface lots to be a very low-risk investment that make you money. So yes, there should be incentive to turn it into an investment that makes you, but there's risk involved in transforming it. And so by monetizing parking lots, you do run the risk of them staying even longer.
And to that point, first of all, I agree. If I had enough money to buy me a nice little parking lot, everybody has somewhere to park. That said, we require, like when people, for any businesses, right, we require parking. We're not requiring that they monetize that parking, but why wouldn't we? Why wouldn't they monetize that parking if they're already required to have it anyway? So I don't know. I don't know if that has any weight, but at least that makes me think we're creating more incentives again for people to own spaces for longer periods of time than their use, simply to enjoy the benefits of that monetized parking.
And because there have been parking there at this point, and like I say, you see them empty, at least we're getting to the next step of sharing this asset until it does become, and I politely somewhat disagree with my fellow commissioner that at some point, hopefully, like we've seen downtown, not in all cases, but we start looking at underground parking with development ahead. I mean, we know that's very expensive, but at some point that happens. You know, I was thinking on our prior case that we had about the parking lot at the church, and every time I go by there, I go, God, what a great development site that would be if somebody would come in and build them, you know, even just a one level underneath. You've got a great housing with first floor retail space there. So I think that maybe I'm going off script here, not script, but off topic, but it does seem to me that there's an economic sense to add more parking that's already existing parking for people to use. I mean, add accessibility is the word. And then hope that down the road it becomes economically feasible to develop that to a higher and better use.
I do think I derailed us a little bit. From a documentation standpoint, I think it's really simple for review.
I mean,
don't you like a little?
I've heard a lot of conversation about this redevelopment math question is, I guess, how I'll frame it. When does the economics work out in terms of parking lots and redevelopment? That's a little bit of research that staff can do and maybe look into that question a little bit more. I have to assume that our esteemed planning colleagues across the country have dealt with this and looked into this already. And so hopefully there are some good guidance that we could maybe pull from and provide back to the Planning Commission.
And have we yet, I'm assuming not because I haven't seen it, but would this be a tool for another, if a bar and restaurant was coming to us asking for that parking variance, would them saying, well, there's this paid lot that's open from 5 to 10 because it's automotive, I'm thinking on Michigan, right? So where Seven Monks is across the street, there is a tire place or brake place. So in the evening, that's where everybody parks, and it's a paid parking lot in the evening. So will we have applicants coming in saying, well, we're only open 6 to 11, and so we can have our patrons park in that paid air lot across the street? I mean, is that a potential that would come in front of us for a variance?
I think it could. Of course, we'd want to confirm the legality of the lot. I mean, we already allow for shared parking arrangements to exist. We encourage it. Whether or not there's a monetary transaction between the two parties, that we're not a party to that, but presumably, there usually is, right? So we already have arrangements like this. I think the difference for me on this is it's not necessarily two property owners working together to offset the needs based on their respective businesses, but it's monetizing parking for anybody. And, I think there's consequences to that. In preparing for today, we also talked about, would it be helpful to understand what lease terms would be expected, hours of operation for the businesses generally, either in the area or specifically on the subject property, whether it's self-service or attended, I think can be helpful. When we have the Christmas market downtown, what their experience has been is having an attended parking area helps, especially, of course, when there's an event specifically, helps the flow of that parking lot far better than people using either an app or a pay station. So some of that depends on the use of the proposed lot. We've talked previously a little bit about what is the existing parking demand or parking occupancy or utilization rates. So I'm maybe assuming that it might be helpful if we have publicly available parking lots that are already in existence, whether owned by the city or owned by a private entity, understanding the availability of spaces, but also the utilization of those spaces to demonstrate, is there a need that isn't already being served by the availability of parking? Presumably on-street parking would factor in as well. If there is, through Mobile GR is here today, John Bartlett, thank you. So I'll let him supplement here, but we do our parking utilization rates for on-street parking. If there is a underutilization of that available parking, that could, I think, call into question whether there's additional need for publicly available parking. So those were some additional thoughts I had in terms of documentation or information, maybe is more correct, that might be helpful in determining whether that second primary use is needed.
Do we have a sense of what leases look like now for these in general?
I don't know.
Okay. All right.
I'll also add that to what Director Turkelson mentioned, I think additional consideration for the Planning Commission too is if any contact information for the operator is present. And I'll let John Bartlett speak to how Mobile GR has maybe heard about these parking lots that are typically advertised as public lots. That has implications for city staff who then get calls and complaints when tickets are issued from the operator or boots or clams are put on cars that have been there past pay space. I know that Mobile GR anecdotally has received complaints regarding these where the public is assumes that these spots are operated by the city and they are not. So contact information for operators, question when a customer has any questions would, I think, also warrant consideration from the Planning Commission.
All right. So I think it's helpful, as we move through and navigate these future cases. Perhaps there will be more, and that's okay. If there are, Brian, I don't want to limit additional conversations. So if there are questions you have, I'm happy to take note of those and answer them and circle back with you. I think depending on the nature of the question, whether we can answer it now, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I said most of what I was thinking. I really do. The idea that we would be using parking lots not just to serve a single tenant, I love the idea. I mean, I think we all know that there's multiples of parking spaces for every car in the country available at any given time, which is horribly inefficient and not okay with me. So anything we can do to help to reduce that long-term is probably a good thing, but and that was honestly my first thought around this. But then as I started to dig into it more, it gets far more complicated really quickly. When you say lease agreements, are there lease agreements with these apps or other things that are, people are leveraging their property in a way that you could lose control over it? That seems horrible.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of these these apps that facilitate the deal and what they require. Although in generalities, you think of Airbnbs and those type of facilitators, they essentially put the legal burdens on the customer, and they sort of just put their hands up. And so I would be surprised if they would require that level of documentation to support being able to use their app. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess my point was more like, is it even possible to get ourselves into a billboard situation in this environment? Because,
yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Anything else, Ron?
Just anecdotally, we had a chance to call a couple of our colleagues across the state of Michigan to see if other communities are dealing with this. We contacted the city of Ann Arbor and the city of Traverse City, which logically to me are two hotspots where I would anticipate seeing these pop up. Neither of them have ever seen these or dealt with them before, so I think we're in a little bit of uncharted territory here. So.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I have one more item for Planning Commission discussion. As all of us at the dais know, this is our last meeting with Commissioner Bershey. She is leaving us for a very awesome job opportunity, so we're very excited for her for that, but we'll miss her very much. And so staff has put together a lovely certificate for her, and so I'm just going to read it for the record. This certificate is presented to Christine Bershey in recognition of her affable, empathetic, and dedicated service since November 16th, 2021, endeavoring to tease out a balance between development, community needs, and the environment, always with a smile. So thank you very much for your service, and we will miss you around this table.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys.
Any other items for discussion?
Can I just say something for the record? Very quick. Please don't call 911 because the noise is too loud. Please call 311. When you call 911, it's very uncomfortable, and I'm sure the police have better things to do than to tell other people to turn down their radio and music. So please call 311. Yes, and all non-emergency numbers. I'm sure maybe you can even text them. I don't know if we have that capability. I don't know. Send a pigeon and some note.
Make an app.
White towel and some smoke. Whatever you got to do, do not call 911.
Commissioner, does this come from experience?
Experience being a black man at a bar that got too loud and the police showed up, and now I'm nervous.
Yeah, I got it.
Now I'm nervous. I've done nothing wrong, but I'm just nervous. So for the sake of our community and our police having better things to do, and for the sake of the people who are visiting these places of establishment, nice places. I love going to bars and stuff in Grand Rapids. And just for the benefit of sanity, let's give the police some crime to solve, not noise.
Well, don't make crime, but.
Right. Don't make crime. Don't be criminals.
Okay. All right. Good discussion, everybody. Okay. We are now going to open it up for public comment. If you would like to address the commission, you'll have 3 minutes. And I'm seeing none. I will close public comment. Anything else? All right. We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.